Let's do it.
All right, the audience, we're gonna pretend that we're friends and we hang out all the time. So yeah, Matt, how's it going? What you been
Well,
doing lately, bro?
Unfortunately, this week I've caught the common cold of this year, which is something that is an annual occurrence for me. So, sounding a bit nasally, and that is probably going to go on for another week or so. And I've got a nice little cough to accommodate to go with it, which is always fun.
Nice.
So lots of tea. Thankfully, not the dreaded COVID. I'm still COVID free.
Oh, nice. Lots of people have been getting it lately because all the spikes in cases seem to suggest. And I'm sure there's lots of people that aren't even reporting it these days as well.
Well, I mean, we've sort of gotten to a point now where, I mean, you know, they've always said like we have to live with the virus eventually, and have we not now got to that point? I've had 2 vaccines and a booster shot, so as most people I know. You know, what is left to do at this point, if that makes sense?
Yeah,
it's like now it's like now human immunity has to start taking the challenge up, really. I mean, we could have done this a lot better too. We could still be in a better position than we are, but you know, like Liberal government led that, so like we could have probably got everyone vaccinated before the Omicron variant hit.
Okay, actually, you know what? Okay, so that's one. Like, okay, before we actually start the show, I want to talk to you about that. What's so the Liberal Party keep goddamn saying that shit, my brain's blanking on this, but something about like, oh, it was their attacks on Labor were like, oh, they wanted to pay for vaccines that people already had, and I'm like, is that not the point of boosters and shit? I don't understand how that is a line of attack that you're using against them. Like the government paying for vaccines.
Yeah. The idea was they wanted to incentivize people to go get a vaccine, which was either do one or two things, like maybe a lottery or a financial incentive, you know, which is like, that's the Liberal Party playbook. When you look at their budget, it's always, we'll give you a little bit of money, you struggling Australians, we'll give you a little bit of money. And the idea from the Labor perspective was, okay, we've got a lot of people sitting on the fence. Let's incentivize them with, you know, maybe going into a national lottery where they could win $1 million, or, you know, maybe it's worth giving them $100 or $50 for travel, you know, things like that were discussed. But yeah, the Liberals were like, we don't have the fucking money for that. But they had $20 million for Jerry Harvey, and they also had, you know, $20 million for the Hillsong Church. So you tell me who has enough money to do those sort of programs. Because apparently we did.
Well, I mean, look, fucking modern monetary theory. We can just fucking print money anyway. The budget stuff is coming up. I guess I should
do it.
All right. Well, I mean, we've been streaming for 3 minutes, so
very good.
Already technically started. But okay, I'll change. I'll change the screen to this one. Yes, good. Got the correct one. Okay. So listen,
hello, everybody.
Hello. Today, well, actually, it was like a week ago or whatever. But Josh Frydenberg released the budget for the year, and there's been a lot of analysis about whether this is a good budget or not or whatever. But really, from my perspective, immediately, I was like, we're wasting a whole bunch of time because it's a Liberal Party budget. Therefore, it will be a shit budget, right? Because these guys have proven time and time again that they're just incompetent and also liars, allegedly. Yep. Again, they're very litigious, so I need to like assume everything rather than state it as potential fact. So allegedly, they're liars, and so shouldn't be trusted with a budget. And and so I don't really even want to go into it, but like. And if you
there's
go, Matt.
Yeah, look, there's probably a couple of things we should cover. So you know, one of the biggest things that we probably need to look at with this budget that was just announced is that there is a lot of secret cuts. So if you go all the way down the budget to table 2 payment measures since 2021-22, MYEFO, it's very, very boring, this document. It's really, really hard to decipher everything. I don't know if Tommy's able to I don't even know where you'd find this particular bit, but it was retweeted.
Yeah, where are you reading from somewhere? Where is it? You can just link it.
I can do that. Let's see. We're gonna link this in the chat.
Do it. So let's see if mod powers work.
There we go. Should be some mod power abilities. Activate.
Oh my god, I see a link.
You see a link. Excellent. And again, sorry about the way I sound, folks. It is a cold, not COVID, which is lovely, but I do have a cold, so I'm going to sound a little bit funny. So one thing I want to talk about that she posted up is there seems to be $3 billion in secret cuts. And while Tommy works out the technical logistics of that, I'm just going to keep chewing through this.
Yeah, go for it.
So it's listed in the budget as decisions taken, but not yet announced and not for publication. And then next to that, we got some negative numbers, negative 916 million, negative 1,167.9 million, negative 892 million. There you go, Tommy. You've got it up there, and you can see that all. Question mark, $3 billion in secret cuts. And those are all infrastructure cuts. Now, that's something that people have been discussing this week. What do those cuts mean? Why haven't they been announced? And they probably haven't been announced because they are probably really bad projects. It's projects that we probably need, which have been cut. And the question is, how bad are they that the government will not publish them at this time? And sorry, you're also going to bear with me. Occasionally, I am going to have to cough to clear my throat. So I apologize for that as well. So my question is, what are they cutting here? Infrastructure is incredibly important to this country. There are 3 things that help to strengthen the country and help to strengthen our economic results. And there are 3 things: education, infrastructure, and healthcare. 3 things. These are the 3 principles of a very, very strong country. So what are they cutting, Tommy? Are they cutting public transport? Are they cutting new road projects? Are they cutting repair infrastructure projects, you know, looking after some of our dodgier roads? What's going on there? Where are these cuts?
Well,
and I'm very curious.
I mean, it's probably not roads, but it'll just be, I mean, it's clear from the last 9 or so years, they don't like funding things in general. And if they do, and this is part of my whole spiel at the start, was basically like, even if they had the most progressive budget, the best airtight budget that you could get, that had like, oh yeah, we're going to expand Medicare, we're gonna build a whole bunch of universal housing or whatever, they would do it in the shittiest way possible.
Yep. Well, look, you look at infrastructure projects that they've run in the past, just to speak to that point you made. Yeah. We look at the NBN rollout. Now, the NBN rollout that the Gillard government wanted to introduce was fiber to homes. It was a complete new system. It was using cutting edge, brand new technology, and they just wanted to roll it out, one big hit, take the financial loss, and then build a company that the federal government could actually make money from. One of the things that people always scream about, and they're completely wrong when they say this, but one of the things that they always bring up, government should be run like a business. Government should make profit, right? The principle is that if a government is running things like a business, it will make profit. That profit will then be able to be poured into infrastructure projects. Now, I don't have a fundamental problem with that principle, but it never seems to happen that way. Now, what the Gillard government proposed was that they would build this NBN system. It would run off fiber. It would be brand new. It would cost this much, but the federal government would form a company called the NBN company, and then slowly over time that would make enough money, and then no doubt once it became profitable, a Liberal Party down the track would sell it, which is what they always do. That's why we don't have many public assets anymore. We used to before they were all privatized.
Yeah.
So that was the plan. And then Tony Abbott came in and was like, nah, that's going to cost us too much money. So he introduced a worse plan that ended up costing so much more money. So when it comes to the federal government and their infrastructure projects, when it's a Liberal initiative, very rarely do you get anything that works. Generally what happens is you have people like MPs like, Daryl Maguire down in the, my little country area of Wagga Wagga, who use, they pork barrel. They take federal government funds, they take state government funds, and they pump it into shit projects. So you're right, Tommy, in assuming that the Liberal Party is not going to do the right thing when it comes to infrastructure. And that assumption is correct based on their track record of not doing very well with infrastructure. But those $3 billion worth of cuts are obviously going to be very upsetting to voters. The other reason why you can't really believe this budget that's coming up, it's because it's an election budget. Election budgets are never real, right? They're never real. They're not real for two reasons. Number one, the party that is generally putting it forward are not going to follow through on it. It's a lot of spin. It's to get voters excited. The other thing is that should the opposition party get in, then it doesn't matter anyway, because, they're going to have their own budget. And of course, that's why the opposition party has their budget response, because in this case, the Labor Party is essentially telling the Australian voter, this is what we're going to do for you. The other thing about the Liberal budget this year is that they're doing the standard play. This is a John Howard era play of doling out money. We're going to give you an extra $250. We're going to give you an extra $1,000 tax incentive. We're going to help with cost of living. None of these things are going to help. As we were talking with our group of friends on Tuesday, one of my brother, in fact, Lindsay, turned around and said, how is $250 going to help me when cost of living has gone up so much? And when we looked at the calculator, we're like, okay, how much if you were to break that up week by week, how much are you actually being helped? The answer is $8.50. So if you're a voter and you get excited about $8.50, I'm sorry, but the math is not going to be on your favor.
Yeah.
But maybe $8.50 is exactly the right amount of money you need to get by week after week. Maybe that's
I talked about
the right amount of money.
Yeah, I think I also talked about this with you guys, but not only is that a lot of those things, we're going to ignore the fuel excise because both Labor and Liberals are doing that. But the one-off payment that you do get, you have to wait until you lodge your tax return in order to get it. And a lot of the cost of living pressures are happening now. In 6 months' time, well, it's actually not 6 months, but it's 4 months or whatever. The war in Ukraine could have ended by then, and the supply issues that is concerned with oil and wheat might not be there, and so cost of living could very well go down. So,
yep.
It's much better to have that stuff now than it is later, and Labor knew that, so that and we know that during the GFC, not only did Labor just straight up just give a whole bunch of people money, but they gave them $700 in a time that was much easier to sort of deal with, right?
Yep.
So that you got more money under Labor, and there was no sign of. And the critics will say, "Oh, but that led to more debt and inflation or whatever." There was no inflationary pressure that happened out of that. Similarly, there was no monetary inflationary pressure that happened after this government printed a bunch of money for the pandemic. The issue is, and I'll bring this back before we move on and dissect the government, even though I really don't want to, but the handling of the pandemic response and their aged care response was, we'll just give money to the providers. We won't give it to the places that need it. We'll give it to the institutions because we trust the for-profit institutions to do the right thing. And shock, they didn't do that, and so we had a whole bunch of money wasted because private corporations who made profits just kept it.
One of the biggest, one of the silliest notions, and it has been proven wrong time and time and time again, is that when like charitable giving needs to be regulated and it needs to be controlled. It doesn't. People know what they need to spend money on. You know, it's kind of the fallacy of a thing like Christmas, for example. You know, let's say, for example, Tommy, I'm buying you a present and it's a really nice jumper. And I think it's a great jumper and it looks wonderful. And the price tag says $30 on it. I wrap it up. I hand it to you. You look very unimpressed because you don't like presents. You open it and it's a jumper that is a size too big for you. You don't like the style of. And you're like, okay, well, this is great. You know, for someone who isn't me. So you would assign a value to that of like $5, $10, which essentially means that that gift is devalued. But if I just handed you $30, that gift is worth $30, right? You know, I'm giving you $30. You know exactly what it means. Now, people may think that example is heartless, but the reason I talk about charitable giving in such simple terms is because if you give someone $100 today, they know what to do with it. They know what they're going to do with it. And it's even like the stupid argument of, oh, they're just going to spend it on booze and drugs. That may be the case for some people. That may be the case. But if you give someone $100 and they've got an extra $100 in their pocket to buy booze that week, they may then have their regular pay packet to then go and buy more food for their family as well. Or they'll take that money down to the bottle shop and the person working at the bottle shop will end up getting a portion of that money anyway through their wages.
Yeah, it just circles through the economy.
And it circles through the economy. Yeah. One of the things that people got really angry about during the pandemic was the idea of, increasing money for people who are on welfare. It was a brilliant look, credit where credit's due. It was a Liberal Party decision. It was a federal Liberal Party decision. And I'll give Josh Frydenberg this. He did the right thing when they initially started that, when they said, we're going to give money to the lowest income earners in Australia. What did those people do with it? They went out and they spent it. They put it into supermarkets. They put it into retail. That money flowed through. It kept people in jobs. It was the right thing to do. And what did they do? They simply gave people cash. They handed them cash. And people know how to spend money. Now, when it comes to this cost of living stuff, $250 is not going to do anything for anybody. It is not a long-term solution. Yes, they will be able to take that money. They will be able to spend it on something that they want. But at the end of the day, we need better solutions to our economic problems. And better solutions to the economic problems is talking about stimulating new industries. Not once did they talk about investment in renewable energies. Not once did they talk about electric vehicle manufacture. In fact, they did the absolute opposite and said they were taking money out of renewables.
Yeah.
That's
one of the things.
That's what you're getting.
I watched Q&A, and I don't know why I did. But there was a bit in it where Zali Steggall was like, hey, you know what you could do with all this money is basically give people, like you have, actually, I might have that on the thing. So, Matt, if you go to the watch party thing, we can probably have a watch of this little bit. So, I think it's at 23:49. And this one. Let's see if...
Let me come to you, and coming back to Talia's question about debt, would you support more urgent budget repair?
I would like to see more fiscally responsible spending. So, for example, in the budget, when we talk about debt and the intergenerational debt, We now know the price of Barnaby's consent for net zero before COP26. It was between $15 and $20 billion on the budget bottom line.
Is that right?
Well, I think it's really important that we understand that we are making sure our economy is stronger. When we invest in the Pilbara, it's because we export iron ore.
Just quickly, is the price tag right? $20 billion?
I don't see it as a price. I see it as an investment to make us stronger. Tonight, in Mr Albanese's budget reply speech,
let's not get to the budget
he didn't mention
reply.
the word regional once, or actually tell us once how he was actually going to earn more money.
So this attack line was fucking rampant, right out of the gate. So like you can tell that they don't even give a shit about their own budget, because like almost immediately after they announced it, they were just like, oh well, Labor have nothing in their budget. And I'm like, who's asking about fucking Labor? What are you doing? Just tell us about, some of this. They have like $11 billion or something earmarked for the regions. And I've been like, this whole time, I've been like, what are you actually doing in the regions? Like, what is that $11 billion going to? I would like to know, but they're too fucking busy attacking Labor for.
I think
for
it's
what?
because they know that the strength of their budget as a voting tool is not very good. And I think that's why they're not, so they're just going to keep ramping up attacks on Labor. As they should. We're going to talk about the polling data at the end of this episode, which is what we're going to do leading up to the election. And it's not great. There is still a substantial gap between the two of them. So I think that they know that the Australian public didn't particularly welcome the budget. One of the biggest concerns as well for people that was brought up this week is how are you going to help with cost of living when it particularly comes to housing, both the prices of houses and the amount of rent that people are being charged. Yeah. And then Scott Morrison said, well, we want people to buy houses so they don't have to spend so much money on rent.
Yep. I just love rich people logic, dude.
Yeah.
Rich people logic.
It absolutely is. Now, if you're like, the way that I was able to walk into a home, for me personally, and Tommy, you have a similar set of circumstances where it's sort of like a couple of extraordinary things happen to make it so that people like us can afford a home. What happened for me is we had to rent an absolute shithole apartment for a good 4 years. And then every single cent that I earned, I put into a savings account while my wife, we basically lived on her income. And I never would have been able to do that as a single person. And neither would have she. So already you have to form a partnership in order to afford a home in our circumstance. And then in that one very scary week for the real estate market where they didn't know whether housing prices were going to go up, whether they were going to go down, whether they were going to stagnate, we managed to see a place. The owner was scared shitless that they wouldn't be able to sell it. They needed to make money. So they took our offer very, very quickly, and we were able to actually reduce the asking price, which does not happen in this country. Now, those were exceptional circumstances. We're talking about a once in a generation pandemic created the circumstances for which I was able to capitalize and buy a relatively modern home. And mind you, only a 2-beddy in an apartment building with no backyard. Look, I love my place. I'm not saying that it's horrible, but and most people would be grateful to live where I live. But at the same time, we're not talking about a house with a picket fence and a backyard. So those circumstances all had to come together. It was a congruence of events that allowed me to afford a home that you cannot replicate. A lot of that was luck.
Well, it's getting harder and harder
timing
to replicate because the barrier for entry continues to increase. And their policy of making it more first home buyers entering the market is, I don't know why they're continuing to do that. Like to some extent I understand that you want first home buyers to have a house because that's it ensures their ability to survive in the future, right? But if interest rates go up, you're fucked. And they're basically just lowering the bar of entry. But if wages are so low and house prices keep going up, i.e. the mortgage repayments are going to keep going up, and your wages aren't increasing, how are you ever going to pay off the loan?
Right, right now we are
if they keep flushing in first home buyers, again, there's a lot of supply, there's a lot of demand, and that pushes prices up. I don't know why they keep using this strategy. Just fucking build more houses. Like you solve this through, if you're gonna have a market economy, you can solve this issue through the supply and demand thing. So just supply more goddamn housing.
Over in England, for example, they do what's called government housing, right? The idea is that the government builds a house, you rent from the government with the intention to then buy the property. So the government makes its money back on the investment into the property. They make a little bit more profit on top of that. And then eventually you're able to secure a home for a decent amount of money, right? That's how they do it. That's how they get people into homes, right? In this country, the housing market is on a knife edge. It is on a knife edge because the banks are frozen in keeping their interest rates as low as possible because they have to. So that means that mortgages, more people are borrowing more and more and more because their house prices keep going up and up and up, but the interest rates are very, very low. Now, if we should be actually sitting on an interest rate level in this country, and people get very upset with me for saying this, but we should be sitting at roughly 5 to 7%, right, of interest on a home. That's how much we should probably be seeing at. Some loans, like my personal loan at the moment, we're seeing on 2.8%. Tommy, I think you're seeing at what, 1%?
No, 1% is way too low. I don't think anyone's at 1%. But yeah, like everything's
you got
around
a really good deal.
Yeah, I mean, if you shop around, there's some pretty good deals out there, but some of them can be a bit like from newer players that aren't as reliable and might not like. And what'll tend to happen is like they'll advertise a very low rate, and then like a year later they'll just bump you up. They'll just subtly just bump you up, and so you know, that kind of stuff will happen. But you know, that's kind of irrelevant. We've gone into a massive tangent about housing.
Yeah, we have.
The cost of housing. But it's not that relevant to the budget at the moment.
Well, the reason I bring it up is just because that they sort of keep spruiking the idea of cost of living. This budget will help you with cost of living. But when you look at housing, when you look at rent, when you look at inflation, when you look at petrol prices, that is not true. There is no relief coming in this budget. And that's why I wanted to bring up housing and speak on that a little bit.
And it's like, $8 a week for your new mortgage or something. Like it doesn't make sense. Like I don't get it. Anyway, we're going to continue watching this clip because I think at some point Barnaby Joyce does something stupid. But like there's also plenty to pick apart of like what he is saying now, which I think he believes has substance. So
I just want to be clear on this. This was the deal, though, the net zero by 2050 deal.
And what Zali's talking about is an investment that we are making so that we can export more iron ore, export more beef, build the dams, export more coal, so we can actually pay for your NDIS, pay for your social security.
But some of that
because
spending,
if people don't talk about how they're going to earn the money, then you can't spend it.
That is just spin.
You're a fucking government, Barnaby Joyce. You own your own currency. You can just fucking print money, okay? You can also delete money, which is the Reserve Bank is doing now. So monetary inflation isn't like really an issue. So please learn some modern monetary theory and go fuck yourself.
Especially...
We know, for example...
Yes, Matt, you want to say something?
In relation to bringing up funding for the NDIS, that was the NDIS was a Gillard government initiative. And it was already funded before they lost power. So again, you know, it was a program that was already fully established before the Liberal government took it over.
Yep. Again, like all these, like basically every institution that you can think about that is good, like Medicare, the NDIS, Labor made it.
Yep.
So
the social security he is talking about, the government that he is a part of, constantly wants to remove that. And on top of that, Barnaby Joyce is the leader of the National Party and is constantly spruiking, you know, how he wants to help farmers, but he's also the person who takes away those social safety nets from the farming community when they see fit. He is not out there to work for the farmers. He never has. But yeah.
And then I think Friendly Geordies has plenty of videos on that if you want to watch those. But yeah, we won't get into it now.
You've got about $7 billion allocated to dams that don't pass the sniff test. Like they have not been approved by the body that was responsible. I've listened to you, so just a moment. They, for example, they have not got a business case. There is no...
This is the thing about Barnaby Joyce, is he just, and I assume this is like white male privilege, where you're just so used to just being able to bulldoze your way into a conversation that he keeps trying it here, but like women these days, and especially those in politics, understand this tactic, and they'll just fucking shut you down. So with Barnaby, I'm like, dude, if you just shut the fuck up, you wouldn't be so ridiculed. Like that's half the battle.
Well, society has moved, in some ways we've regressed, but in other ways we've moved forward. So what she's done there is very, very smart, because what can happen now is that clip can then be taken. It can be shared on social media. It can be shared on Twitter. It's like, look at Barnaby Joyce getting taken down. So society, it's a good sign that now a female politician can do exactly what male politicians were able to do, which is shut someone down and then get their point across. She can now do that and actually gets applause rather than boos. So, we have seen at least somewhat of a societal shift, which is really good.
And also, I want, like, from this point going forward, I want everyone to just look at Barnaby's face and just see how dejected he is at like having to just listen.
Yeah, he looks like a bit of a slapped ass.
It's the usual promises before an election. The question of how much will ultimately get built is probably questionable. But for your generation, what you could do with $7 billion is huge in terms of actually investing into future infrastructure that will reduce the cost of living. But for that price,
can I just clarify something with you, Barnaby?
860,000 households could have solar panels on their roofs and save $1,000 a year.
The dams that Sally Steele's talking about, Barnaby Joyce, the
solar
dams
panels per capita than any other country.
Let me just ask you about.
So, Barnaby Joyce is saying, so Zali Steele very I think that would be generally good policy if for a government, be like, hey, motherfuckers, guess what? You all get solar panels.
Yeah.
In terms of reducing the cost of living, absolutely makes sense. And that goes on years and years into the future until the solar panels, aren't effective anymore. But that's like 10 to 15 years down the pipe. But again, like she says, that'll save them hundreds of dollars, like thousands of dollars a year on their electricity bills. And then Barnaby is like, we have more solar panels than anyone in the world. And it's like, so what? There are still places that don't have them. What's your point?
I don't have a solar panel. I'd love some on our building.
It's especially hard for you, right? Because you don't own the entire building. So you'd have to go through some body corporate or something to try and do that.
We do. Like just recently, I participated in a vote where one of the residents of our complex said they want to put solar panels on. We're just waiting to see how easy it was for them. And if it proves to be quite easy for them and they got their approval, we're probably going to look at doing the exact same thing so we can help out, we can get off the grid as well. Now, one thing that conservatives love to talk about is trickle-down economics. So let's talk about trickle-down economics in regards to building more solar panels. As Tommy just said, Barnaby Joyce saying Australia has more solar panels per capita than blah, blah, blah. It doesn't fucking matter. It's irrelevant. That's a stupid statement and it means nothing. If you start building a solar panel industry in this country, if everyone is like, look, we're going to make it cheaper to manufacture them here. We're going to make it cheaper to buy, or we're just going to slap a solar panel. We're going to give you 10 years. You make sure you save up enough money to replace it in the future. That means we're manufacturing the panels here. You will have to have people who will offer services like, g'day, love, I'll jump up on top of your roof for $50, to clean off your solar panels, and then I'll move on to the next house in the street. You build an industry of people who clean and maintain solar panels. You give people who install them jobs. You give electricians, we would see an uptick in people that would be able to become electrical apprentices. You create an industry overnight. And it's as simple as making it easy and affordable for people to put solar panels on their roofs. We'd be manufacturing a new product. We'd be maintaining that product. We'd be installing that product, AKA jobs, jobs, jobs.
Yeah, like these things, like generally when you talk about these kinds of policies, they generally always have side effects that no one really thinks about, but are always generally very beneficial. So again, like social housing is good for the economy at large. It doesn't just give someone who doesn't deserve it a home, okay? But it makes them have an address, and if they were homeless, that actually allows them to participate in the economy. Because like a huge barrier in getting a job is like having an address, shit like that. So you make them productive. You create like a whole like area of economic activity, because you know those people like underneath their little apartments or whatever, they'll have cafes and all that other kind of shit. Like you build a whole bunch of stuff. Yeah. Anyway, that was. I watched this and I was like, Jesus Christ, Barnaby, how can people with arguments this shit be in government? I just don't get it.
Oh, because he wore a cowboy hat and he slapped on a whip.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
The dams, Barnaby Joyce, one of those dams is $5.4 billion you've committed to the Hells Gate Dam in Queensland. It doesn't have a finalised.
This is the one that
or
very quick.
approvals.
Oh shit!
Wouldn't it be better before you spend our money to?
Okay. Whoops. Okay, so very quickly, that dam was. I'm pretty sure it was the one that Bob Catter was like, and Jesus Christ, Bob Catter, can you help me out and not say something fucking ridiculous when I'm trying to like be on your side? Because I think in the news like this week, he was like, yeah, we should give, I don't really understand the context for this, but he was like, yeah, we should give kids guns. I'm like, what are you doing? I don't, like, I was all on board when you were attacking the Liberal Party and were like, yeah, this dam was a lie and they're making it smaller than it's meant to be. And so I think that's the context for what is happening, what these guys are talking about now.
Make sure the business case stacks up?
Well, David, it was actually recommended by the Queensland government. It was an item of critical infrastructure by the Queensland Labor government.
You still do a business case.
And now we hope for the Queensland, and we are doing a business case. Now we are hoping that the Queensland Labor government actually backs their rhetoric up. I've got a feeling because
wouldn't it be better to get that business case before you spend the money?
I've never seen a dam in Australia. I haven't seen one dam that people want to pull down, because ultimately, as you get, water is wealth, a dam is a bank. You're going to get your hydroelectricity if you want renewables. You've got the water for hydro.
Okay, so he's basically just going to talk about how dams are good. But like, once you've built a dam, who's going to tear it down? Like, that's Liberal Party logic. Like, these are the guys who are like, oh yeah, we're just going to rip up a contract. And it's like, why would you just waste a bunch of money? Not like no one in their right minds would do that. But the point is, you get the business case first. And like what Bob Catter was talking about was, he wanted a bigger dam, which probably would have cost more money, which is why they don't want to do it. And in doing that, you have a better dam that makes more money because it provides more irrigation and probably more power generation and all that kind of stuff, right? That's what they're talking about. But he's implying, he's creating a straw man that's like, oh yeah, we want to tear down dams once they've been built. Like, oh fucking course not. Once they've been built, we're going to take the economic bonus, but the economic bonus could be better. Right?
Let's look at, yeah, absolutely. But let's look at the practicality of that statement. Now, I actually lived in a small town. We had behind us what was called the Blowering Dam. If you tore down the Blowering Dam, Tumut would be flooded within, you know, it's a silly argument to make. Like, dams are one of those things that once they're built, they're pretty much there. You know, so what he's trying to do there is conflate the idea with demolishing coal fire plants, which we are becoming less and less dependent on, hence the fact that they're no longer profitable, hence the fact that they are demolishing them, to then demolishing dams. So again, like you said, Tommy, straw man argument, waste of everyone's fucking time.
Yeah. And like, anyway, that was all I wanted to show for this bit, but yeah. He's allegedly just a fucking idiot. Like, I don't get it, okay? But yeah, anyway.
The reason that Barnaby Joyce has had such a stronghold in his community, he's had such a stronghold in his electorate, is for the simple fact that he's a man of the people, in the respect that he'll actually go to local communities, he'll go to the pubs, he'll have dinner with people. When he does go and politic in his local areas, he is very, very good at it. That's why he wins. You know, when it comes to, you know, let's try and be fair and balanced here. When it comes to the Labor Party, just like the two major parties in this country, they can find themselves being inaccessible to people that want to vote for them. That's why, generally speaking, when it comes to country areas, the Nationals will clean up. Just in my local electorate, which is Eden Monero, recently the Nationals were able to hold on to their seat. And I actually know the candidate quite well who actually held the seat for the Nationals. That's Nicole Overall, who, although I don't like the National Party, I am a fan of Nicole's, and I think she'll do a good job. She was here. She was present. She went out to the local sporting events. She went to the local communities. She talked to local business leaders. Whereas the Labor candidate, we just didn't see him. And the reason that we didn't see him is because the Labor Party generally wrote off Eden Monero instead of fighting for it.
Yeah.
And that's why people like Barnaby Joyce and the National Party continue to win in rural areas, because the Labor Party doesn't, like, they count themselves out of the race before they even run it. And that's the problem. It's like their strategy seems to be, well, you know, when it comes to the national race in Eden Monero, that the Nationals had someone who lived in Queanbeyan, so we're not going to bother to campaign in Queanbeyan. That's exactly where you do campaign. You campaign everywhere. Every fight is worth winning when it comes to winning votes. Every single fight is worth fighting. The Labor Party struggles with that concept. The Liberal Party also struggles with that concept, but the Nationals, the Independents, the Greens, they know how to go out and reach their community because they have to in order to guarantee their seats. That's why people like Barnaby Joyce will continue to hold on to their seat, because no one will go into those communities and actively fight against him. That's the problem.
Yeah. Look, I'm gonna, because I'm more of a pragmatist, I'm gonna disagree slightly. I don't think every fight is worth fighting. Especially like if Barnaby Joyce gets his seat and he's the only one on the right wing, and like literally every other seat is like Labor or Greens, I'm fine with that. Like, I don't give a shit about his fucking seat. You need to get the majority. You have finite resources in which to throw at a problem. And one of the issues with the last election was that Get Up and various groups like that spent way too much fucking money trying to get Tony Abbott out of Warringah.
Yep.
Now, that long term might have been good because Zali Steele has made a name for herself. And so in that electorate, she might, as the incumbent, retain it. But my issue is, if those resources had been more evenly distributed in other areas, that the election might have been in Labor's favor.
We'll see. Actually, it's interesting
because it wasn't lost off of much.
Yeah, because what? So that's interesting. So number one, groups like Get Up and things like that, they're not actually party groups. They're considered, they're just independent groups, and they can decide where they want to spend their money.
Yeah.
So, just because I want to make that clarification that we shouldn't conflate special interest groups with the parties themselves. So Get Up is a progressive movement.
Yeah. The reason I brought them up was more about the tactics and not about the group itself. Like everyone from the Greens to these independent groups. Like there's one, I can't remember his name, but he's a really rich person and he's giving money to independents, and he has like a team of independents that he funds. And to me, it's about, okay, you have all these resources at your disposal. It's about how you manage them. You can't fight everything because you just don't have the money for it. And yeah, like the fact that the Liberal Party don't fight on every front, like part of it is because they have a lot more money. So, but they seem to be much better at like understanding which targets which electorates to target and gain and win seats and stuff like that.
they also have the National Party in their back pocket. That's why they are a coalition government, which means that they essentially, like, if people may disagree with me on this, but when it comes to the Liberal Party, they essentially have the Liberal Party and the Liberal Party Light, which is the Nationals. That's essentially the rural branch of the Liberal Party. And that's why they're able to do what they do. So they send them out to take care of the rural seats, whereas, big Liberal, they look after the more wealthier areas. So that means that for them, they're essentially tackling that. Whereas Labor, they have to do everything. They have to take out the whole pool, and like you said, Tommy, resources are infinite. You have to spend them where it's applicable. I understand that completely.
They're finite.
But Labor does need to invest a lot more time and effort into rural Australia, because rural Australia is where they keep losing their votes. And honestly, it's where they keep losing a lot of their elections. The metropolitan areas are generally safe enough, except for the affluent areas. Like, the more money you have, generally you trend in coalition voting. That's just how it's always been, and probably how it always will be. Conservatives and the wealthy get on together. They're in bed together. The Labor Party does need to get more action out into rural areas, because when we look at rural Queensland, when we look at rural New South Wales, they generally vote Conservative. So if you want that voting bloc, you have to reach them. You have to reach out to them.
I think with the shooters, fishers, and farmers, I think they are much more likely to get that kind of vote. Like Labor, again, with the media how it is, there's I just don't see how regional areas will just vote Labor. There's too much disinformation about them for them to to overcome that. Like, they have to spend a ridiculous amount of money. And Lindsay is in chat, and he's been saying things like the Libs will just give seats to the Nats. So yeah, they have a lot of a lot of strategy and stuff to play with. Like, if Labor had that kind of coalition going with the Greens and maybe the shooters and fishers, then I think the playing field will be completely different. But they're just not allowed that level of I guess connectivity to other parties.
I mean, I would like to see in this country, especially when it comes, look, I think just in general, politics should be far more accessible for people. Right now, we have this system of, and this is how you seed your rural candidates as well. We currently have this system where you go to university, you join the Young Labor or the Young Liberal Club, you then end up being a personal assistant for a senator, and then eventually, if you're lucky enough, they then put you forward to run in your seat. Where Labor can win the rural electorates is through workers' rights. There are people working in forestry, in sawmills. There are people working on farms. There are people, there's all of these, there's this voting potential, because oftentimes we see in federal elections, it's the rural bloc that ends up helping the coalition to power. So if that's always going to be something that helps them to get to power, then Labor does need to conceive of some way to be able to win that bloc over. Now, when it comes to disinformation, the Greens Party will not be elected in a rural area. I know that growing up in a rural area, it's just not going to happen. At the best, they're seen as communists. At the worst, they're seen as, someone who wants to take away your land and free your dog and all that sort of rubbish, which is rubbish. One of the greatest lies that's been put out there is that the Greens stopped the rural fire service backburning, which is absolute bullshit. That's coming from someone who used to work with the rural fire service. It's absolute bullshit, but that's how people in the country think. Now, could a Labor candidate go into the country and talk about, look, we want to help you with cost of living. We want to make sure you've got a lot more money to take home to your kids. We want to make sure you have affordable housing in the country. Someone could go in there and they could do that. Now, when it comes to this, my
issue is that even if they tried, you say that all that stuff about the Greens, but a lot of that sentiment is just applied to Labor as well. I know someone who's yeah, don't vote Labor in the election. And I'm like, oh, I didn't realize you were a conservative or whatever. And they were talking about how, oh yeah, Labor will take away your land and stuff like that. Like they don't care about your rights to have property and land and stuff like that. I'm like, okay.
That's a new one. I haven't heard that one before.
Yeah, so look, that kind of stuff is pervasive. So, and that's why and that communist angle is also applied to Labor. So it's like, again, like they have the resources that they have in combating that in the regions is, I think, better placed doing that in other areas, because like the regions are a thing, right? But in terms of population, those electorates are smaller than the suburbs and stuff like that. So it's probably easier to get disillusioned voters in the cities and the suburbs than it is to get the ones in the regions at this point in time, given the current media landscape.
The question is, though, and this is the question that I pose from a simple mathematics perspective: can you win a federal election without at least some rural support? And that's the question. Because it's that rural support that keeps getting the coalition elected. You know what I mean?
But it's also like super wealthy people in the inner cities as well. Like it's not just
absolutely
regions.
It is. Absolutely.
And there are regional towns who aren't brain dead or brainwashed or whatever else, right? Like there are, I assume there's plenty of regionals that have and voted Labor for a long time.
Oh, absolutely. And look, I'm not suggesting that the people in rural Australia are stupid. I don't think they're stupid at all. I came from a Labor voting family. I've voted Labor, consistently. As Lindsay said in the comments, there are wealthy people in the country as well. Those wealthy people, they do turn around and say that, you guys should vote this way, or, they hold seats in local councils and things like that. And, they support federal. Look, it's going to be one of those things that will be decided by the election this year. We've seen time and time again that the coalition continues to win through support, especially in rural Queensland, especially in rural New South Wales. Two massive conservative blocks in both states. It'll be interesting to see what, can Albanese win without huge support in those areas? Has the coalition fucked up enough people? Where I think that there could be a turning point, although, like you said, Tommy, there is this considerable amount of misinformation in the rural demographics. The rural demographics have also been hit so hard by all of these natural disasters, and the government support for them, as we talked about last week, has not been there. And I think that could in itself prove to be a turning point for rural communities. If those small townships have not been able to rebuild, if those people who said, that the government handouts were coming have never seen them, could that turn people against them? Even going all the way back to the response to the fires, the reception that Scott Morrison got when he went to these fire affected areas was basically, fuck off, we don't want you here, you haven't helped us, get lost. Have they generated enough sentiment through the lack of disaster management and disaster relief to actually turn those voting blocks against them? There is the potential for that to happen.
I think that'll be a big deal.
We will see.
For sure.
Absolutely. What else should we talk about other than Barnaby Joyce is a fuckhead?
I mean, look, I had a whole bunch of other stuff prepared for the budget, so I guess, look, we'll just go through that.
Yeah.
So I found this very interesting. This was an article by the ABC, and it just talks about like this one simple trick that treasurers use to, I don't know, get a fat dick or something. It's basically like there's a term that they use called funding for this measure has already been provided for, and apparently you see it 51 times in this paper. And what's interesting is, during Wayne Swan's last two budgets, or in fairness, Joe Hockey's first one, this never occurred. And it didn't appear at all in Wayne Swan's last budget. So there's some trickery that is at the root of this phrase, and like it's probably innocuous in general, but someone while the coalition has held power, figured out a way to use it for their own nefarious purposes. And basically, it goes into how things are funded. So you can see in this example that they put up that the Australian Signals Directorate is going to get $680 million, right? But you see that most of that is funded for by the Department of Defense, right? They're basically just reallocating Department of Defense money and putting that in the Australian Signals Directorate for this red spice thing, right? That's all fine. But then you have something here like the Great Barrier Reef, which last year they were like, yeah, we're going to give $1 billion to the Great Barrier Reef, right? But in the budget, they have 12.4 million earmarked, and that's it, of government funding. Yeah. So everything else, so the reporter's like, where's the rest of the $1 billion? And the answer is we don't know. They're using that whole funding for this measure has already been provided for to justify that extra $1 billion for the Great Barrier Reef funding. And that was announced in the MyEFO from the end of last year. And so in that document, they didn't explain how they were going to fund it, because they were just like, oh yeah, we'll fund it later. And so we still don't know, even though this budget paper is meant to tell us where the $1 billion is going, or like how they're getting it. We don't know how they're getting it. So this occurs 51 times throughout this document. So there's probably a lot of shit where they're like, oh yeah, we have the details, it's fully funded, where it's basically just been an abject lie. And they'll attack Labor for not having any details or any policies. But they're using accounting tricks to not detail any of their actual spending here. So the budget, given what they've probably been spruiking, is probably far over budget compared to what they should be. Or they're just not going to fund it, potentially, which is also within the playbook of the Liberal Party. So, Yeah, anyway, I found that pretty interesting.
All of those points are 100% spot on. Like I said earlier, it's an election budget, so chances are a lot of the stuff that's in there is not going to happen anyway. One thing that they like to do as well when it comes to like, hey, you're saying you're spending this much, using that like funding for this has already been provided. So what they like to do is they go, okay, we're going to spend $1 billion. Let's just pretend that they are going to do this. They're going to go, we're going to spend $1 billion on Great Barrier Reef preservation. What they'll often not say is that previously they may have funded it for, $1.5 billion, and they're actually going down a little bit. But they sort of like, they guarantee this sum, and then they add a little bit extra to it, so it looks like they're increasing. I know it's sort of, it's a magic trick. It's smoke and mirrors. So, and I mean, like, when it comes down to it as well, can you honestly believe anything that's in this budget? And I don't think you can. I don't think any of it is feasible. I don't think any of it has really been thought through. And I think all of it is just to attract voters with empty promises. I think it's all rubbish.
Yeah, I mean, there are a bunch of other lies that Josh Frydenberg will employ in general. And I have a couple of those, so we'll go into them. So he says things like, we have overcome the biggest economic shock since the Great Depression. Our recovery leads the world faster and stronger than the United States, the UK, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan. Now, if you're an astute observer of spin, this is selection bias. Okay? He's saying our recovery leads the world if you only include these fucking countries. But as I think Alan Austin wrote this article, if you look at the globe, it's not that rosy, okay? The claim that Australia's recovery leads the world is one of the two most easily disproven falsehoods in the history of budget fabrications. Australia is nowhere near the leaders. There are 58 highly developed countries listed by the United Nations Development Programme, with populations above 300,000, for which we have current annual GDP growth figures. Australia's puny 4.2% for the 2021 December quarter ranks a lowly 43rd among these 58 nations. And then he breaks down like the growth of the various other countries, and with countries having 10%, 5%, like it's like, this is a lie. He also says employment in Australia is now well above pre-pandemic levels and has grown by more than any major advanced economy. And again, you just keep adding adjectives to a thing to just narrow down the definition, and then you'll be the best at everything. I am the best water polo player in the room that I'm sitting in, for instance, right?
This is what they're true.
It's a fact. Then this is what they're doing here. So it's not technically a lie, but it's essentially a lie, right? Like they're basically just obfuscating that.
It's disingenuous. And I mean, speaking about employment levels, we discussed this when we were chatting. Let's talk about employment levels right here with this statement. Employment levels are not, as they have suggested, sitting at, the 4.55%, because they're playing a trick that they've always played. Back in the day, the trick that they used to play was, if you are listed as a casual worker on the books, then you are employed. So for example, your local supermarket, they may have a roster. I guarantee, let's be nice, and let's say about 5% of that roster is non-active. It's people who are still on the books that the proper paperwork hasn't been done to get them off the books, right? Those people would be considered employed. But now there's a new tactic, and you talked about this earlier, Tommy. There's a new tactic that they're employing now, which is if you work for Uber Eats, you're employed, which is absolute rubbish.
Yeah, so yeah, if you sign a contract with them and you have 0 hours worked, yeah. I was going to bring that up in one of these guys. But anyway, okay, yeah, so you brought that up. But so in this article, Alan Austin goes a different approach, because he actually looks at private sector employed, which is 83.2% in February 2016. But now the private sector employs 82.2%. So the private sector is employing a whole 1% less of the workforce than it used to.
Yep.
So this claim that they've through their policies and stuff increased the workforce is basically, it's mostly local and federal governments that have been increasing the workforce. And during the pandemic, that makes sense, right? Because you have a lot more people who have to deal with these natural disasters and get into Centrelink and all that other kind. Not Centrelink. There's a new thing for that. But yeah, basically Centrelink. There's a whole bunch of services Australia people that are probably need there to do stuff now. But yeah, that's the main thing. There are other things that get into more detail about how this budget is rubbish. But you should read the article. Go to michaelwest.com.au and find that. But the one thing that I found interesting was the actual cost of living stuff. So what's interesting is that, according to Callum Foote, who's been digging into this kind of stuff, overall, we're actually, as a low and middle income tax person, you're probably going to get hit with a $30 a week tax increase. Because with all of these added, with all of these things that are getting removed and all that other kind of stuff that they're not telling you about, like the low and middle income tax offset, that ends in January. That ends in June, similar to when you're going to get that payment of $450. So since all of that stuff is happening at once, this thing that you benefited from is now being removed, and then you're getting this one-off payment, which isn't all that much. You're actually going to be worse off over time.
It's like if you're a lower or middle income earner and you've been able to enjoy, let's say you're making about $60,000. If you've been able to enjoy rebates of $2,000 or higher, say goodbye to that. It's about to disappear. It's going to go right down. Now, what's interesting about things like that, and again, I'm bringing it back to my personal experience here, with that extra $2,000 that comes into my household, we use that to essentially pay down debt, be it credit card debt, things like that. We use it to go get vehicle service. To get a vehicle service, you're looking at, anywhere between $280 to $350. That's what that money goes towards. So essentially what will happen to us is, not only are we going to get less money back at tax time, and we're paying more tax as middle income and lower middle earners than we ever have before. We're getting less money back at tax time, which means I now have to find money in our personal budget to then pay down that debt, which for the last couple of years I've been comfortable in using our tax return to pay off, which means, as I said last stream, not going to the movies, not buying furniture, only buying essentials, cutting back on supermarket spending. 4 industries will be affected by me not spending money.
Which is bad for the economy.
Which is bad for the economy. I don't know how many times this has to be said. It will continue to be said again and again and again. The rich do not spend money. They don't spend money. It's just been proven time and time again. If you want a strong economy, lower and middle income earners need to have the most amount of money that you can make available. And the reason that I say that is because they're the ones who'll not only spend their pay packet, but they'll also take on credit to spend more in the economy. Lower and middle income earners spend 110% of their pay packet. It goes directly back into the economy. Millionaires, billionaires do not do that. They create tax havens. They find every single way that they can in order to keep money in their pockets. They do not put it back into the economy. If you don't put money back into the economy, it doesn't stimulate it. There aren't jobs. It has a flow-on effect.
Yeah. All right. So to get back to, oh god damn it, to get back to this thing, not many people talk about this, but also the super increase that they were talking about a while ago, that's going to come into effect as well. So more of your pay packet that you have each week is going to go towards the increase in super. Now, principally, I like the increase in super, but it's coming at not a great time. And the ideal is that super increase won't affect wages, but people are using it as an excuse to not lift wages, because of course, private corporations, etc., etc. And so for most people, that'll actually affect their bottom line as well. So you know, you have that, and if interest rates increase, so if you have a mortgage, that's going to affect you a lot as well. So with all of that, there is a what this graph basically shows is that this is going to be is what is going to be needed for your weekly wage to increase for you to cover all of that other shit and like live a life, I guess. So none of what the budget has done actually addresses those extra issues, and so it doesn't actually help your cost of living, even though all of the newspapers will tell you that it's what are they called? One of them was like it's a workers' budget or something. It's for the workers.
There's nothing in there for the workers.
Yeah, it's garbage.
There's no investment in infrastructure. There's no investment in job creation. There's no investment in industry. There's no investment in people at all. There's nothing there for anyone. If you are in that working class side of society.
Yeah. Also, like really quick, like we'll end. Rubbish. Yeah, we'll end this budget stuff. But we were talking about the NBN before. Oh Jesus.
Yep.
This one. Okay, we were talking about the NBN before, and it seems like the NBN isn't going to get any extra support. And I just wanted to bring up this quote, which I thought was amazing. Okay, so this is from the Communications, Electoral and Plumbing Union of Australia. The NBN was set up to fail from the moment this government chose to replace the fibre to the home rollout with aging copper wires. And again, they're trying to fix that at the moment, right? So they're trying to upgrade some of the fibre to the node stuff that they're now admitting is shit, and they shouldn't have done it. And they're trying to get to what Labor had before. And it's just like, you should have just done the job right the first time you...
Correct.
Anyway,
spend the right amount of money on the job, get it done, and it's done. Yeah. It's as simple as that. You hire someone.
So Barnaby Joyce previously said you don't tear down dams. Like, we as reasonable people, Matt, you and I wouldn't tear down a dam because it doesn't make any fucking sense. But people like the coalition would, because out of spite they will do things like, because no one would tear down or like the NBN. But they did. Like, why would you do that? It's ridiculous.
No one in their right mind would damage important infrastructure or introduce a substandard system when a much better
that you'll have to
system
fix,
was
like that you'll
funded
have
and
to fix
available.
later. Like
Yep.
it's
And here's the question, media. Here's the question. Tony Abbott is constantly making himself available for the media. Why hasn't anyone asked him what he thinks about the state of the NBN that he put in place? Like, have some fucking courage. Ask some hard questions. Write an article or two. All these people are going to university to learn how to be journalists, but no one seems to have the bollocks to actually go out and do it. He's
there's a couple
he's
people, like,
publicly
these guys.
available. These guys who are leading like independent journalists and civilian journalists, people like Friendly Jordans, they're actually asking the hard questions. I like to think that we're asking some questions that people aren't asking as well. But, all of those people who are currently going through university at the moment, who want to become journalists, who are passionate about it, God, I hope they continue that passion and don't join up with News Corp and don't join up with Fairfax Media and don't join up with these mainstream media outlets. I hope people go out and try and create their own thing, because
unfortunately, like these people need to live.
It's a joke. Yeah. Look, do something better with university. Don't go in to become a journalist. That's for damn sure.
Like, that's fine, but like for me, use that like. So as a government, it'd be like this isn't why you would advocate for something like universal basic income or like a welfare state, is that you'd have these journalists to come out of university and they would not be pressured into going into News Corp to get a job. They could just do journalism on their own terms because they wouldn't need journalism to survive. They could just do journalism for journalism's sake, which is what you kind of want to have happen. But anyway, like I'll finish off this quote. This government has had years to fix it. Instead, all it's done is allowed the network to be riddled with pyramid sham contracting schemes that have left workers high and dry and customers cringing over endless connectivity and speed issues. So yeah, if you're having problems with this kind of stuff, it's because of the Liberal Party and like if there's pyramid sham contracting schemes happening, that's like free market liberalism, neoliberal, anarcho-capitalist bullshit that's being allowed to fester in this ecosystem, right? This didn't happen as much under Labor, and it wouldn't happen. Like unions don't like this shit. It's just bad for everybody involved.
The only time in recent memory that I can think of Labor actually participating in this stuff was the housing insulation scheme that Kevin Rudd introduced. And when they did that, a lot of sham contractors got involved. People died, and it was it was an absolute fucking disaster. But
okay, I retract my statement.
Yeah, so the reason I do that is because,
that's fair.
I don't, I want to, like, as I've said, and I continue to say, both Tommy and myself are progressive people, we're left-leaning people, but it is important that we do show both sides of the argument. The Rudd government did fail on that behalf, but the Gillard government didn't. The Gillard government didn't want to create an NBN company that would be absolutely riddled with this bullshit. So,
Yeah, and so another thing to consider, again, the media environment is such that this isn't going to be talked about on the news. You're not going to hear about this kind of stuff, even though it is affecting people's lives, right? Like
absolutely.
The digital economy is the new economy, right? That's what's going to replace stuff. And so if that is broken, like how are you going to do your business in the future?
Yep. Especially post COVID with so much remote working going on. I think I go back to a family member of ours. They employ about 100 people in their small business. And once COVID hit, they were relying on, their internet connection to run their business. So we're not talking just about office workers. We're not talking about public servants. We're talking about small business owners, people who are out in the country right now. They are relying on the internet. Mechanics are relying on the internet to get their parts to their shops. That's a fact. It's not just about the office workers who people are like, oh, they should go to work just like I have to. It's not just about them. It's about everyone. The internet now is a human right. It's considered, access to it is considered a human right by the United Nations. The reason for that is we now conduct everything through the internet. When you're doing your banking, it's through the internet. When you're lodging, hell, I just renewed my license, my driver's license, over the internet, because that's the world that we're living in now. And it's very, very important that infrastructure is solid.
Yeah, and I guess just to cap off the budget stuff, like, you know, cost of living measures, one of the ways to mitigate, like another way that you could mitigate the fuel price impacting your average punter is to allow him not to drive. Right? Like public infrastructure, you know, trams, buses, all that kind of stuff, but also like the ability to work from home is a massive part of that. And none of those things were brought up. It's in terms of the cost of living.
Yeah, if you want to increase people's wages instantaneously, let them work from home. Their pay packet just becomes a lot more valuable. You know, the real estate moguls can lose a bit of money. You know, as far as our society goes, the real estate moguls can afford to take a little bit of the hit, and maybe we can repurpose those buildings for something better. Maybe affordable real estate for people who want to start their own businesses with cheap rent, so they can stimulate the economy and employ people. What a fucking crazy idea that is.
Sounds like some commie socialist bullshit to me, Matt. You can fuck out of here.
It does, doesn't it?
All right, moving on to the next bit. So there was a Liberal Party senator called, her name is Conchetta Fierravanti-Wells. And like while the budget was being delivered, I think, she was out there in Parliament just dressing down Scott Morrison for a whole 9 minutes. And it was excellent. I don't think we'll play it here. But Matt, you wanted to talk about this. So go for it.
Yeah, so I'll talk about it briefly. Now, we've already seen these allegations put forward against Scott Morrison. Old Gladys, the former New South Wales state Liberal leader, called him a psychopath over text messages. So we've heard all this stuff before, but she raises bullying allegations. She talks about the federal government interfering in state government policies, that they've got basically their strongmen who are working within the New South Wales Liberal system to pick and choose the candidates that they want to see in state elections. There was also discussions about the Perriott government, the New South Wales state government, bending over backwards to accommodate the federal government, even though he has said that, you know, he is not a fan of these people. So she goes into a lot of things. Bullying accusations are raised. Now, what's interesting about this and the media response to this is it's actually not been as typical as it normally is. And I wonder if it signals the complete and utter downfall of Morrison, because both the ABC covered this very, very quickly, which, you know, ABC generally does. So that's not a huge alarm for me. Like, that's not a like, oh my God, you know, media is turning against him. But news.com.au talked about it. And that's the Murdoch tabloid website, one of the most trafficked news sites in Australia. They covered it for a few days. And I find that very, very interesting. What I also find extraordinarily interesting is that you have multiple people coming out saying that Scott Morrison is a psychopath, that Scott Morrison is a bully, that Scott Morrison is an autocrat. Yet we spent about 2.5 weeks talking about how viable Albanese's position is, because there were accusations that some of the senators in the Labor Party had bullied someone to death. And we covered that in our last stream, so you can go back and listen to that. But I find it very, very funny that our media landscape focused on Albanese being related to bullying when we've had multiple first-hand accounts from people within Scott Morrison's party who outright call him a psychopath, a bully, and an autocrat. It's an amazing speech. It's very articulate. She is very good at what she's done. And, you know, people call us out, like they're like, oh, you know, she just wasn't put up for re-election, so she's saying all these things. That's generally what people do when they feel that they've been wronged, is they stop holding their tongue. It's like, if you're working in a job and you're about to resign, those 2 weeks are a complete fucking write-off when you're giving your 2 weeks notice. That's essentially what she's doing. But it's just interesting to me, Tommy, that more of the media landscape has actually picked up on this story, which does signal to me that the conservative media may well and truly believe that Scott Morrison is about to lose this election. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think they could have gotten away with this without covering it. It seemed to be built to be a skeptical. Like, I think, like, she knew what she was doing, and if the ABC is going to cover it, there's no way that the other people aren't. At least in a little way, like the coverage isn't as big as the other one. Like, I don't see Sky News talking about this much. They're going to demonize her a little bit. That's about it. But yeah, just because the media is covering it, I don't like it. Them bringing it to light is more evidence that Scott Morrison is bad, and that being disseminated amongst the public is good. But I don't necessarily think that that actually speaks of necessarily of the media going against Morrison, given how they wrote up the budget stuff. Like on the front page of the Australian, the cost of winning, which, you know, assumes that they're going to win, and this is what the cost is going to be needed to pay. But it's they're still in their pocket. They're still going to try and do that. But let's just, I think if they didn't, it'd be blatant partisanship. Like, it would just be absolutely clear to see if they didn't cover it. And, like, it's gossipy, right? It'll get clicks. That's the other thing, right? They also need to make money. So there's that aspect of it as well.
It is interesting with like, I always like to talk to a few different people in my family and social circle just to see where they're sitting. And a couple of them were very much like, you know, Albo should have done more to address these bullying allegations, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, I'm like, okay, like, this has come out this week. I'm going to be curious to see what those same family members say, because I'll no doubt talk to at least one of them. And my question will be, you know, what do you think now? Like, you know, do you feel the same? Do you think that they've outrightly called him a bully and an autocrat and a psychopath? You know, do you feel that that is going to negatively affect them? Because it's like, people made the ridiculous claim that Albanese has lost the election based on those bullying claims. He absolutely hasn't. It's such a fabricated hit job.
I also don't think it'll matter. Like, well, like, we'll show this later. I guess we'll just show this now. Fuck it. Where is it? Hold on. And I guess we'll recap this at the end again, but he has had a cut in the polls. Labour in general has had a cut in the polls based off of the bullying allegations. But by the time it's election, by the time it's the election, I don't think anyone's going to remember that. Again, like, this bullying allegation, because, you know, people have very short memories. Like, the Labour stuff is going to be a distant memory, especially if this kind of stuff keeps cropping up, which it might. So, and, like, they still haven't, like, pre-selected, like, a bunch of people in New South Wales or something. Like, that's in the courts right now, and that's probably part of the reason why Morrison hasn't announced the election, or hasn't called it, I should say. So,
which he's gonna have to do soon. Where in April, today is the 2nd of April. So he has to make these calls, and he has to do it very, very soon.
I think it's within the week. So I think this coming week is when the election is probably going to be called.
Yep. And then basically you've got you then go, okay, the election gets called. It's usually about 6 weeks once they call the election, because our cycle is not the same as the American one, which seems to go for fucking ever. It's like 2-3 years of bullshit.
There's always an election because they have the off season as well, like the midterms and all that other. It's nuts.
Yeah. So yeah, well, we should see as soon as he announces it, about 6 weeks from the announcement, that's when we'll be going to the polls. Question will be how we actually go to the polls, you know, whether it's all going to be mail outs or whether they're going to encourage people to go to polling places. But, you know, when it comes to COVID, we probably just got to live with it at this point. So I think it'll just be as a normal as election as we can expect.
Yeah, I hope so. I want to go into the ballot box because I want my vote to be counted as early as possible. And also, I really like the idea of like democracy sausage. I think that's just a really unique Australian thing to be like, yeah, a democracy is good.
Yep.
Democracy is good. Let's celebrate with a sanger, mate. Good.
Yep.
I'm a fan of it.
We're over in America. Republicans try and make it illegal for you to hand out a bowl of water to people waiting in a line to vote. You know, we're the exact opposite.
I love it how they spruik the how much they love democracy, and they'll shut down anything that's not a democracy overseas. But then within their own country, when a democracy is happening, they're like, nah, fuck you. Don't do that. Get the fuck out of line.
Yep.
It's incredible.
It is. It is absolutely amazing. Because I think Australia, for the most part, still happens to have one of the strongest democracies in the world, for the simple fact that we are required to vote. And that's it's as simple as that. You know,
and
your
system is designed slightly better as well. The voting system.
Yeah, absolutely.
With the preferential stuff and everything. Is there anything more you want to talk about the polling? Or I mean, they're still ahead by a fair amount.
Yeah. So the loss hasn't been, you know, as big as everyone talked about. 10% is still a significant lead. I think they will recover as, you know, the budget is going to give people a bit of uncertainty. It's going to affect those numbers as well. So I don't think it's just the bullying allegations. I also think it's the budget coming out. Some people like the budget, some people don't, and that's going to change the polling data. The other interesting thing that came out this month.
I don't think like, because I don't think this poll would have been conducted with the budget in mind. So I think the next one, so for next week, the budget and the budget reply will probably be in the mix there. So it'll be interesting to see how, like if there's a massive swing, that'll show, like the Liberal Party is saying that, oh yeah, this everyone is taking this budget in, everyone loves it. And I'm like, really? That's not the sentiment I get. But again, we live in our bubble, so the polling will kind of indicate whether or not they're right about that.
Absolutely.
So I'm hoping there's a fucking massive swing against them, which just proves that their budget is dog shit.
Yep. The interesting, the other Roy Morgan poll that came out that I find quite interesting is that Treasurer Josh Frydenberg is up 10% on Morrison. He's 10% in 1 month for preferred leader of the Liberal government, which is quite good. You know, so he sits at 46%. Scott Morrison is down to 28.5%, and Defence Minister Peter Dutton is at 14%, which is actually up by 1.5 percentage points. So that's quite interesting that Peter Dutton has had a very small groundswell in the polls. But look,
if he didn't look so evil, he'd have it in the bag.
He would. He absolutely would. But he looks like a bastard, and that's all there is to it.
Yeah, he looks like he is not. He looks like he's an alien, and generally speaking, we're all very xenophobic. So, that's unfortunate for him.
Yeah, see, that is actually one of the things that people forget is looks and appearance actually do make a big difference when it comes to putting people forward. You especially see that in the past with things like, you know, the Richard Nixon, John F. Kennedy debate. Where Richard Nixon looked like a sweating monster while John F. Kennedy was John F. Kennedy, a very handsome, articulate man.
Yeah, I mean, they use that against Bill Shorten. So like, we know its effect. Like it happens.
It does. It absolutely happens a lot, and that's why like Albanese's makeover, as it is, you know, he lost some weight, got some new glasses. You know, that does make him look, you know, like a leader. Like it makes him look strong and it makes him look charismatic, and I think that's the whole play there. But just
you see what's interesting about that?
Frydenberg got that.
Yeah. So what's interesting about that is Friendly Jordies was on his podcast. He was talking about how, or at least before, he was like, this is a terrible move for Anthony Albanese to get really thin because Australians like your fat beer drinking men.
Yep.
Right. And so if he's all skinny now, it's just like, what are you doing? But I think he has changed his tune on that, because I think their strategy of him being like match fit and like ready to do the stuff, and being active and everything else has worked in his favor, it seems like.
Yes. I think so. I think Australia is in the shit. We know we're in the shit. So we need someone who's, you know, who's ready. They're ready to fight. They've got the energy. They're tough. And I think that's what they're trying to project. They're like, this person is going to lead us out of crisis. He's not going to sit there in a fucking Hawaiian shirt pretending to play a ukulele. That's not what they're going for. Because the thing about, like, you can do one or two things, and I think Bob Hawke was the champion of this, where you can be for the people, but still appear tough. And Bob Hawke was the guy who would go down to the bar, he'd talk to people, he'd be very charismatic, but he also looked like he could take on someone in a fight. That perception is really important. And when it comes to Scott Morrison, here's your like schlubby dude that hangs out and kind of plays the ukulele badly and, you know, washes people's hair. And every time he tries to be the everyman, he fucks it up. And the reason he fucks it up is because he doesn't understand the everyman. He doesn't have a concept of who we are. He doesn't have a concept of people. You know, it's like
I think it worked for a while, but the veneer is cracking. Like the more you see him, you're like, oh, you're not actually an everyman kind of a deal.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. Whereas, you know, we don't need an everyman to help us get through one of the most chaotic economic and global times that we have ever seen, you know, in our recent memory. We need a fighter. We need someone who's going to be tough and strong. And I think that's why Albo's look is going to help win him the election. Like, I think it's a foregone conclusion that the Labor Party has won. Honestly, I do.
Matt, don't do this. We can't. We cannot be complacent. Okay, so just on the topic of Albo's appearance, I want you to ask your I guess your more right leaning family or whatever, that question, whether his makeover works in their favor or not. I think that would be an interesting thing to ask them as well.
Yep.
But
I will.
Yeah,
I will.
On the topic of Albo, I probably should talk about his budget reply, because I actually set an alarm, like a complete nerd, for when that was going down to watch it, and it was like, he's been known for this, but like Albo is really good at doing speeches. So he'll have this thing where like he can change his cadence and his articulation and his tone very well. So like there's a moment where like he's very rousing, and then almost immediately he's like, he brings it down to more of a somber thing where he's like, my fellow Australians, this is where I came from. And I liked it as an opportunity. And I don't think it got much play in the media, but it was a good opportunity for him to like talk about his side of the story, because, you know, the whole narrative is like, we don't know who the hell he is, you shouldn't vote for him, people you don't know, etc., etc. But he talks about how, you know, he grew up in public housing and how he had a single mom and that she'd be proud of him now, or whatever, and all that kind of stuff. What I was noticing though was like there were all these just tiny little jabs that he was just poking at the coalition's record. Like he mentioned that like he went down to the fire affected areas in this region and this region and got and did handshakes with the locals. And I'm like, oh, that's a jab at Morrison. There's got to be a jab at Morrison. That's excellent. And he kept throwing all those in. But the main centerpiece of the thing, which is going to get the most coverage, is that he's going to fund aged care better. And he's basically just, I'm going to do what the Royal Commission says. So what I like about that as an announcement is that the reason why he's not just bringing up the budget, which is what the Liberal Party wants him to do, is because he doesn't want like a massive thing for them to attack. And so so this was the centerpiece of his post-budget reply, was, I'm just going to do what the Royal Commission does. It's super safe. But he also brought in there, and no one's giving this much play, but he was basically saying something along the lines of, I want this to be, I'm going to focus my funding and stuff on the caring economy, right? Childcare, aged care. I thought he was going to say Labor cares, right? It seems like that just rolls in.
It's kind of a good slogan, actually.
Yeah. I hope they bring that into the campaign. But he didn't bring that up in the speech. I thought he was going to do that. But what he did say was that these things should be universal. So I think later on in the campaign, it might very well be the case that what Labor wants to do as their like flagship kind of policy is to make childcare and aged care a universal thing, similar to Medicare, right? They might, which I think would be really cool. So it'd be another thing that Labor does, that they implement if they get into office, that the Liberal Party can't take away. Like once it's in, it's just super hard to dislodge because once everyone's used to having this benefit, no one wants to take it away from them. So I think that's super cool if they do a universal child. Like I'm not going to benefit from that shit like at all, but I understand for the country that would be super good for the economy and again cost of living for people. Because if you're a worker, you can just foist your kids off to childcare if it's a universal thing, and that's covered by the government and taxes and stuff like that. Then you can work more and be productive. I think it just benefits everybody.
The joke in this country at the moment is that you need to take on a second job to afford the childcare that you're putting your child into so you can have a second job.
Yeah.
That's the joke of it. It's almost getting to the point now where it's actually cheaper. I say that obviously it's not true, but people suggest that it's now cheaper just to have one parent stay at home rather than pay for childcare. Because it's extraordinarily expensive in this country, and we do absolutely need strong childcare. And for the elderly as well, I've said this again and again and again. The 65 and older bracket who keep voting in the coalition, are you happy with the way that the elderly have been treated in this country over the last 3 years? Are we happy with the amount of people who have been found malnourished and dying in nursing homes?
Yeah.
Are we happy with that? Because they keep voting for these people, so they must be. And I think that's.
I wonder if this will actually get some cut through with that demographic. Because Labor the only ones talking about it.
It's aimed towards them. Yeah. It's aimed towards them. It's a really smart move. The Liberal Party helped to get the grey vote last year. The last election, because they talked about the tax incentives that Labor wanted to get rid of. Bill Shorten, he went to the electorate with, I want to remove negative gearing, I want to remove tax credits. And unfortunately for him, both great ideas, but unfortunately for him, the coalition was able to say, sorry, elderly, he's coming for your money. And it freaked them the fuck out. So, over 3 years of the federal government, we've had this COVID response. We've had this pandemic. We've had lots of elderly die in nursing homes. We've had work shortages. We've had work shortages in the healthcare sector, especially in public healthcare. So these are the things that affect the elderly. Why are you voting for a Liberal government that's treating you like shit? You're either, and if that's the case with our elderly, if they're happy for those conditions, well, keep voting the coalition, because that's all you're going to get. But we will see. We will see. Now, Tommy, it is 2:00. Did you want to cover what's going on with the New South Wales government, or do we want to wait till those laws are solidified and talk about them?
Well, they're in. They got pushed through.
They did get pushed through. So the Greens didn't manage to filibuster it out.
I don't think filibustering works in Australia. But yeah, so there's this bill that got passed that it's bringing harsher penalties onto protesters. So these protesters would have been the ones that you may have seen on the news lately, where they've been like disrupting supply lines and things like that. And basically it's legislation that's going to fine them up to $2,200, $22,000, or jail them for a maximum of 2 years for protesting illegally on public roads, rail lines, tunnels, bridges, and industrial estates. Now, I don't know how specific this bill is, but it is, whenever there are laws that are passed that stop people from protesting, I get very scared. Because as much as I don't like slippery slope things, the more I see of this encroaching or there are just more restrictions on your right to protest, the more I'm like, are we ever going to be able to strike? Because a strike is a protest. And the aim of this thing is to stop the wreaking of people being able to wreak economic chaos, right? But imagine if like the truckers or the retail workers did a strike, a protest, that would absolutely cause massive amounts of economic chaos. Now, this bill was supported by Labour and a bunch of the crossbench. It was only the Greens that sort of were against it, I think. So I have to assume that given Labour's support, that this won't actually affect strike movements, because I'm assuming strike action is different to, like, legally distinct in Australia from protesting. I'm not actually sure about that, but
no, actually,
no?
it's not. And
Okay.
that's one of, reading up on this. It's one of the Guardian covered it.
Okay.
I've just been having a skim through as well. No, the broad generalizations in this bill is very basically, if you affect any public infrastructure in any way, shape, or form, you could be liable. So if you're using the public road to lead your protests, and we've seen a lot of protests in New South Wales, especially the health workers have been out and about saying that they're underworked, understaffed, and underpaid. Overworked, I should say, not underworked. The poor buggers are doing their absolute best at the moment under dire circumstances. No, it could affect everyone. It could affect everyone's right to protest, which means protests would be limited to, maybe everyone can gather in a park, or you can't protest out the front of your workplace. The term interference is such a broad generalization. Now, why did Labor support this bill? Most likely because the Liberal government have put it in place in light of the climate protests that happened. And that's essentially what this is. So, while it's basically a magic trick, once again, it's like, look at this hand, look at this hand. We're going to stop those annoying climate protesters. But what they're also going to do in the process is make sure that it's harder for all of us to protest when it comes to important things like protesting for climate change resources, for protesting for workers' rights, for protesting for wage increase. That's what they're trying to do. Now, the perception out there at the moment is that the only people who are protesting are climate activists who are going to shut down major traffic. And for those the dodgy cookers who are mired in their conspiracy bullshit and think COVID, is this vast, great conspiracy. If you want to hear more about that, go check out my other show, We Crap in Australia. But so that's what they've put forward. And when people put these ideas forward, it basically means that the Labor Party is sort of screwed into voting for it, because what they have to do then is show that the perception, yes, we're in favor of this because we don't want disruption to everyday people. If they don't vote for it, they look bad amongst everyday constituents. That is where you need courage to be a politician and not be people. We do need to get back to that era of people doing the right thing as opposed to doing what's going to get them re-elected. In this case, the Labor government has acted somewhat cowardly in the face of a terrible draconian measure. It could also affect the way that the Labor Party is viewed by the union movement that does support it in this country. It will have a massive flow-on effect.
Yeah.
So, what they could have done, because the Labor Party fully believes that they're going to win the next state election in New South Wales. I think they could, and they have a very good shot at doing that. So I think they have played a hand based on a possibility rather than doing the right thing in this case. So they've weakened our ability to protest. They've weakened the rights of Australian workers, and that will come to bite them in the ass. They could very well have just lost a huge amount of the healthcare vote. because those healthcare workers are out there right now fighting for their rights. The Labor Party could now just disenfranchise those people. There are repercussions.
So apparently the new laws were not designed to block actions such as the New South Wales Nurses and Midwives Association's mass strike yesterday, says Mr. Speakman. But like, I don't trust him. I don't trust him. Like, it seems this is one of those kinds of laws. Again, like when you have very vague laws, whoever is in power is going to determine what breaks the law and what doesn't. So because it would be optically bad to attack, to like break down that this strike, they're not going to do it here. But any other time they just feel like, oh yeah, you are bad, I'm going to jail you. They can, because again, it's vague. It's like, yeah, you shut down A Street, that's economic damage, go into jail. And that's a scary prospect.
The Labor Party in New South Wales have said that, you know, they've introduced amendments to protect industrial action. We'll see what happens when it gets tested in court.
Yeah.
You know,
guess we'll see. But yeah, anyway, that was concerning to me that this, like, while I was bringing up all of the stuff for the stream today, I like just browsing ABC News and it had come up in the last hour then. So I think you probably have a more the Guardian probably had something that came up, you know, this morning when I was asleep. So, but yeah, it's concerning stuff.
They've done a pretty big breakdown. The people that look, you know, you can point the finger at certain people as well. You know, we've got a lot of lone wolf protesters out there who decide to, you know, disrupt people. They decide to cause problems for people. It's been proven time and time again, the more you inconvenience someone, the more you will turn them against the issue that they're fighting for. But I also understand that people, especially who are protesting climate change, they are frustrated, they are angry, and they need an outlet. And I understand why they do what they do. But has extreme protest action led to the Liberal government in New South Wales being empowered to do this? You would have to say yes. And you would have to say that, you know, the people who do bear some responsibility for that are the extreme side of protesting. They are the people who will shut down lanes of traffic. They won't apply for the proper, because you can apply to protest. You can have massive protest action. And these lone wolf protesters who aren't affiliated with any particular, you know, interest group are the ones who have that ability to sort of, you know, shut down lanes and lanes of traffic. And it's led to public opinion turning against people in climate change circles. And it's also, you know, right now we're dealing with a similar situation in Canberra. We've got a bunch of illegal protesters here every single fucking day, causing mass problems, causing problems with transit, causing problems with public transport. They're doing it constantly. And it has definitely turned the Australian public against the idea of you know, good free speech protesting. So it's unfortunate that it is now going to affect more organized climate change activist groups. It's going to affect people who do want to take industrial action. And, you know, it's down to some people who have, you know, probably done the wrong thing in the way that they've protested. So, you know, I guess that's an ethical argument. Like, this is all spurred by, there was one young woman about 2 weeks ago, maybe it's even sooner. Good old David Koch, the absolute, should be careful, we'll get sued, Tommy.
David just say allegedly or assumedly.
Yeah, the alleged dickhead. He you know, he basically ran a climate protester over the coals. But that young woman said, look, I'm not disrupting traffic. I'm not stopping people getting to work. I am simply, you know, stopping this industrial train line to get my point across. Was she doing the right thing or the wrong thing? I don't know. Has it contributed to them being able to impose these draconian laws? Yes, it is. You know, have vegan protesters who have like just glued themselves to fucking pavement, have they contributed? Yes. Has the anti-vaccination movement done it as well? Yes. You know, there's a lot of crazy out there, but it's now made it very hard for people who are actively trying to get things done. You know, so yeah, bit of personal responsibility is there as well.
I guess, look, there are optical considerations, I suppose, but one of the things also to consider is that, like with the BLM riots, with the BLM protests, there is a certain sentiment where, like, okay, so as a society, why have you let this happen? Why have you let the protests get this bad? Right? If the government was seen to be doing better on climate, no one would feel the need to do this kind of shit. But they haven't, and that's why they're protesting. And it's been years and years of it. And so with years of not being listened to, with, you know, standard protests and whatever, things have to escalate. Right? Yes. If you're not going to do anything, that this is just a natural escalation of how those things go. And so putting laws in place for that, and in such a vague way as to like essentially affect potentially standard protests, I think is never morally justified.
No, it's not. And don't get me wrong, I'm definitely not on the side of the Liberal government in New South Wales on this issue. I think they're 100% wrong. I think Australians' democratic right to protest is something that should be expanded on and protected. And you know, but you have to look at these things objectively. What is the reasoning behind this? These are the reasons for it. It's extreme protesting action, and it has led to negative Australian public sentiment. And that's the thing, Tommy. Like, if you went and talked to someone who is, you know, who doesn't see the broader issues and doesn't see the broader implications of these sort of laws, if you went out onto the street and said, oh, you know, do you think it's a good idea that we can now fine and jail protesters who cause inconvenience to you and yours? They're going to say, that's great. You know, unfortunately, the general public of New South Wales, I don't think is going to be upset with this because they have been inconvenienced by this extreme form of protesting, and the optics of it are going to be like, it's going to be seen as a Liberal slam dunk, which is, again, going back to my earlier point, which is why the Labor Party has obviously supported this, because I think it would be political suicide not to support it, because the Labor Party could come up and say, look, our argument is that we're looking to protect industrial relations. They've said that they've introduced amendments to protect industrial strike action. We'll wait and see how, you know, that's the thing with these laws. You've got to wait to see till they're tested.
I haven't actually
seen, they're taken to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I was looking around last night, but I couldn't actually find the legislation to read it and to figure out how broad it is. But
the Liberal government may find that it's unconstitutional as well. So it could be, you know, someone will no doubt take it to the Supreme Court, and when it is tried in the Supreme Court, they may find that it's it goes against the Constitution, which is always going to override state laws anyway.
Yeah,
there is that possibility, and I hope for that. I believe in everyone's democratic right to protest. I think it's hard enough to protest in this country at the moment. You have to apply for permits. You have to structure it. You know, even taking industrial strike action. You know, there should not be such a thing as illegal industrial strike action. If a working group feels that they are being disadvantaged and wants to walk off site, they should be well within their rights to do that. You know, so we've seen a lot of watering down of protest laws in this country, which has also meant that we've seen a watering down of industrial action that workers can take in order to make sure that they have a fair wage that they can then take home for their work. You know, a fair day's pay for a fair day's work, all that sort of stuff. So no one wins here. No one wins. But the perception from the general public will be that they win. That's the problem. Like, even if you were to just jump on the Facebook, on the social media, and have a look and see how people talk about the anti-vaccine mandate protest versus the climate change protest, for me, both of them cause the exact same amount of inconvenience, yet one is treated far more harshly than the other, Tommy. And I'll give you a guess as to which side is treated worse.
Yeah.
It ain't the anti-vaxxers.
Yeah, it's annoying.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah, we should probably wrap it up there.
Yep. Go plug your shit.
For another week. Absolutely. So if you'd like to check out my other work, I host a weekly podcast with my wife, Holly Sol, called the Weird Crap in Australia podcast, where we talk about everything from the paranormal, true crime, the weird and wonderful, and some of the forgotten tales of Australia. So if you want to learn more about Australia's hidden histories, check out the Weird Crap in Australia podcast. You can find us on any platform that you listen to a podcast on, and you can find us on all those social medias, Weird Crap in Australia, both on Facebook and Instagram, and Weird Crap in Oz on Twitter. And you can also check out our books. You can grab them from lulu.com as well as empatcomics.com, and you can grab them on your Kindle. So if you'd like to check out some of my written work, and yeah, we host that podcast every single week. Haven't missed a week for 4 years.
Nice.
Just recorded
Good
episode 200.
Oh, sweet. Oh, yeah, you had some kind of like Q&A thing for that as well?
Yeah, we did. We had a lot of people sending in questions, which was wonderful. So it's a bumper episode. It's an hour and a half long. So it's an extra like 40 minutes on what we normally do. We got some questions were sent through, like we asked them to record their voice so we could feature them on the podcast. Some people did that. Some people sent in written questions, but they were all really, really good questions. Yeah, we had a lot of fun with that. So episode 200 will be coming out very, very soon. So it's a really good place to jump on with us.
Yeah, nice. Cool. That's it for the Modern Meltdown stream, whatever day, whatever episode this is. I don't know. I had a bunch of stuff. I had another couple clips from the Q&A, the episode of Barnaby Joyce being allegedly an absolute fuckwit. But I guess we can save them for next time or whatever. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you next time.
Bye.